is really important that we also use solemn occasions like this to honor the memory of Jaswant Singh Khalra and of others like him who have done such sterling work to ensure that rights of everyone are protected, that democracy is strengthened, and that the voiceless don't go voiceless, that they are spoken up for by people who care. I also want to spend a moment to pay tribute to his memory, to honor his memory, to remember his work, and join all of you this afternoon doing that. As all of us know, he was cruelly kidnapped in 1995 while he was investigating extrajudicial killings of Sikh activists in Punjab. His work was instrumental in documenting vital evidence with regard to about 25,000 deaths of Sikhs at the hands of the authorities. And of course, seeking to end impunity for those atrocities is vital, and he repeatedly petitioned Indian courts on behalf of the families and loved ones to get them justice. And the key lesson we take away from his work is the importance of that, how that inspires other people, and how that is so important for those who have been denied justice, despite the passage of years, to keep on pursuing that. The rights of the individual belonging to an ethnic, religious, or linguistic minority, such as members of the Sikh community in many places around the world, are enshrined in international human rights framework with strong protections. Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, if you like, the keystone of the human rights framework, as well as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Persons belonging to national, ethnic, or religious minorities, one of the most detailed documents outlining what states must do to protect the rights of minorities, provide these standards and guidance for states in how they should respect, protect, and promote rights of minorities. Of course, there are also very strong protections woven through the entire rights framework on rights to equality and non-discrimination of all persons, which apply, of course, therefore, to minorities as well. In addition to promoting the right to respect, protect, and promote rights of minorities, states must ensure that minorities can take part in decision-making about not just about their own lives, but about the state they're in, and of course, to enjoy their own culture, to profess and practice their own religion, and of course, to use their language. And as you referred, Co-Chair, that the Sikh community throughout the world has faced restrictions, including in the name of, if you like, security, in the way governments have intruded into core elements of Sikh identity as part of that process of pursuing security. Of course, therefore, implementing these measures requires states to take clear legal provisions and, of course, policies to support that. And linked to that, of course, is Article 18 of the ICCPR, which you referred to, the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief of all persons, regardless of whether or not they are in a majority or in a minority. And we see throughout the world that when states respect this right, in the high level of respect for freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief, such communities thrive. They have much better, if you like, political stability, economic prosperity, social, cultural flourishing. And of course, each member of society also feels safer and more empowered when there is strong respect for this right. By contrast, and as we see in many parts in South Asia at the moment, when there is suppression of these rights, they are accompanied by further strife, further violence, more extremism, more inequality, and more despair and deprivation. So there's a clear reason, even from a pragmatic perspective, respect everyone's right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief. Despite this clear message, which has been shown by empirical evidence, huge gap exists between respecting these standards and the aspirations for these. So as UN Special Rapporteur, I identify and respond to existing and emerging threats to freedom of belief around the world, often with an acute focus on rights of persons belonging to these ethnic minorities. You mentioned, you referred to my upcoming reports, and I have two, if you like, on the drawing board. One will be September next year, because this November, we will mark the 40th anniversary of the UN's Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and of Discrimination Based on Religion or Belief, the most detailed document that exists in terms of what rights state ought to protect for religious minorities. And I think for the Sikh community, there are key elements in this document that needs to be protected. And I call upon you to look at this document and to use it as a way to lobby for your rights. I shall be doing a report on this one year's time, look at how states have respected this right. And in South Asia, and as well as neighbors to the East and West, the violations are rising. And I'm very keen to hear from the Sikh community the ways in which my mandate and my fellow rapporteurs, right, rapporteur on minority rights, rapporteur on transitional justice, can be helpful in upholding your rights. And one common, if you like, challenge we face in South Asia, and again in many parts of the world, is impunity. Not only are states directly violating rights of communities like the Sikh community, but also they are responsible for impunity when other actors harm them. And this toxic cycle spirals into more violence. We see that in Punjab, the thousands of extrajudicial killings that occurred many years ago still remain, if you like, unanswered to. And I think the impunity for perpetrators is one of key drivers of future, if you like, future violations as well. So it's not just the Sikh community that face this challenge of impunity. Like I said, in South Asia, other minorities face this. And even today in India, the situation hasn't really improved. And we see to India's or South Asia's west, in Iran, what's going on, in Afghanistan as well. And to its east, can go up as far as China and North Korea, to see how these rights are being violated. So impunity and state repression are, if you like, challenges for all communities everywhere, especially when they appear as minority communities. And of course, even when they're a majority, if a state is repressive, the state is intolerant, nobody escapes if you like, the long arm of the repressive law, as it were. And as you referred to in the COVID-19 pandemic, everywhere, minorities have been further targeted. It's been a stress test which has brought out the worst in most states. Again, society as well as governments are discriminating against minorities. The question is, what must we do or can we do? I want to remind everybody that last year, the UN adopted August 22nd as International Day to commemorate victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief. The word victims, unfortunately, I'd like to call it survivors or torchbearers, as we have been using this evening, but nonetheless, the word is victims. So the point I'm making is that this is a day that we can all, use to highlight, if you like, those awaiting justice for the violations of their rights. And I call upon Sikh community to work with me and others for next year's event to make sure that we make a higher pitch for justice for victims of violations of rights from years past. And what is required here for states is that they must focus on redress and remedy for those who've also been violated, including full restitution, rehabilitation, and guarantees of non-recurrence, which means stronger rule of law, and of course, building resilience into society. So these are big challenges, big demands, but we have to make sure states actually do live up to them. And to guide states on this, the UNESCO has declared what's called basic principles and guidelines on the right to remedy and reparation of victims of gross violations of international human rights law and serious violations of humanitarian law. Again, these principles stress the importance of restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction guarantees of non-repetition. So how do we pursue? How do we make sure states do that? Of course, if states are in denial, if they refuse to acknowledge this, there are various UN mechanisms that can be resorted to highlight these concerns. I have been, and my colleagues have been raising concerns with various governments about violations of Sikh rights. And we would see that in the aftermath of the 9/11, so the secular dimension is coming here, there's been a rise in attacks on Sikhs on the mistaken notion that Sikhs look like Muslims are Muslims. So my current report, next report in March, looking at anti-Muslim hatred, will look at attacks on persons because they believe to be Muslim, and which of course is often the Sikh community as well. And in terms of what do we do when states refuse to acknowledge their responsibility? Well, examples are there from other countries, Iran, China. People have formed what are called people's tribunals. Obviously, genocide is something only a court can, I think, declare. There have been cases when parliaments have declared this, but I think its authority should come from courts. But people's tribunals have been very effective at documenting violations and making the case that certain type of atrocities require certain types of categorization. This also requires guaranteeing space for civil society to fulfill its role in ensuring that there is space to do this work. And the reason why I think it's so important for us to remember the work of people like, torchbearers like Jaswant Singh Khalra, survivors, champions of his work, is that they do so at great risk to their own life. But when they do so, they make tremendous progress. They have made sure that people who've been, if you like, disappeared will not be forgotten. And it's so important for those who've been harmed that their memory is cherished, that they have solidarity, that their survivors have solidarity, and that we work with them. So as Jaswant Singh Khalra once said, and I quote here, when darkness is trying to overwhelm truth with full strength, then if nothing else, proud Punjab like a lamp is challenging this darkness. So I think, end of quotation, I think that challenging of darkness is so important, that we all come together, stand up as torchbearers, and and shed a light on that darkness to ensure that we can see what's going on. Today, I encourage you and join all of you to continue his noble legacy in shining light of truth on human rights violations whenever, wherever, and by whoever's hands they occur, thereby dispelling the darkness for all and everyone. It's a real honor and privilege to launch this very important book, The Valiant by Gurmeet Kaur, today, about a very inspiring personality from whom all of us should draw inspiration, courage, and of course, guidance the work we do. It also serves a very fitting tribute. It's a very quiet yet defiant statement, reminding his cruel abductors that they could take his body away, maybe his life, but not his spirit, and not the light that he spoke about. And I think it's so important to keep reminding everybody of his valiant work, of his great work, to younger generations, to inspire them to do similar sort of work, because the work goes on. It's a tall task. But also, one of the most important things it does is to those Sikh communities back in Punjab, remind them or to tell them of the great work done and give them hope of what can come, but also of those in diaspora community, of the importance of energizing the consciousness about the identity of Sikhs, about the rights of Sikh community, and of the potential there is of working to have those rights delivered, and then have this storytelling as a way to energize all of us. So I also want to thank and pay tribute to the author, Gurmeet Kaur, for undertaking this monumental task and for producing such a fantastic book. I had a quick glance through it on a PDF version. I look forward to quietly reading it and giving it to my students as an example of what one can do and what one should try to achieve.